Podcast growth problems usually don't come from a lack of effort. They come from trying to fix everything at once and burning out before anything actually changes. That's why today I'm sharing the biggest insights from my time at the recent PodFest Expo conference, but through the lens of my signature ARC method: attraction, retention, and conversion. In case we're meeting for the first time, hi, I'm Julia Levine, aka the Podcast Teacher. And you're listening to Podcasting for Solopreneurs, the show that helps online business owners grow their podcast to get more listeners, leads, and sales. If you're frustrated with your show's growth, today's episode is for you. I attended PodFest about a month ago at this point, and to be honest with you, I almost didn't make this episode because I felt like too much time had gone by. But the truth is that you probably don't care when the conference happened. You just want the info. So here we are, I'm doing it. In case you haven't heard of PodFest, it's the longest running annual podcasting conference, and it takes place every January in Orlando, Florida. This was my 5th year attending the conference and my first year speaking at it. I gave a brief talk about podcast SEO, and it was such a great experience. My talk was on the first day, and so I was able to relax and attend many of the sessions throughout the rest of the conference. And in today's episode, I'm going to share some of the key takeaways told to you through the lens of my signature ARC method. ARC stands for attraction, retention, and conversion. Attraction is how new listeners discover your podcast. Retention is what keeps them listening, trusting you, and coming back. And conversion is how your podcast supports your business, whether that looks like email subscribers, coaching clients, course sales, or something else. When a podcast feels stuck, it's almost always because one of these 3 areas is weak. So if you're attracting new listeners, but they're not sticking around, that's a retention problem. If you have loyal listeners that keep coming back week after week, but your business isn't growing, that's a conversion problem. And of course, if you're not getting new listeners at all, that's an attraction problem. The ARC method helps you pinpoint where to focus your energy instead of trying to do everything at once. And of course, that alone can be a huge relief because once you stop guessing what the problem is and define it, then you can start making progress. This is the framework that I teach inside the Podcast Growth Collective, and it's helped my students grow their podcasts with less overwhelm and way more clarity. And so thinking about PodFest, what stood out to me wasn't just the tactics or the tools that were shared, but it was how every major theme throughout the conference could directly tie back to one of these 3 areas in the ARC method. So now that we're clear what that is and why it matters, we're going to break down the info from PodFest. Let's start with attraction because this is where most podcasters focus first, and it makes sense, right? If people can't find your show in the first place, then they can't listen, they can't stick around, they're not converting. Nothing else in the ARC method functions if we don't have that first piece of attraction. One of the biggest messages from PodFest was that podcast SEO is still the foundation to start with. Attraction starts with clarity. Your podcast needs to clearly define what your show is about and who it's for. That means clear titles, searchable episode names, and descriptions that actually communicate who your show is for, and what problem it solves, what it's about. If your content is amazing, but no one is clicking play, you don't necessarily need a new strategy. You just need to make your podcast easier to find. And you would be shocked how often this is the problem with podcasts of people that come to me. A show might be packed with value, but they're burying it under vague language, cute and clever titles that are confusing the algorithm, or just simply curiosity-invoking descriptions that are great for people that are already seeing your content and making them want to click play, but they don't contain any keywords, and therefore you're not showing up in searches for new listeners. And so the goal with podcast SEO isn't just to rank highly in the search results, it's to get discovered by the right listeners, the people who are already typing in search terms that your podcast can meet the need for. And there's an entire SEO module inside the Podcast Growth Collective if you want to work on this. Another major theme from the conference was that visibility doesn't come from marketing everywhere. It comes from marketing in the right places. So SEO strategy and marketing strategy are the two pillars of the attraction piece of the arc. Those are the two main ways to get new people to your podcast. And so strategic guesting and collaborations outperform the spray and pray promotion that most people do on social media every single time. And that is because you are using borrowed trust. You are being endorsed by the person that you are collaborating with or guesting on their show. And that trust moves people way faster than cold outreach. So if you're constantly posting everywhere on social media and you're still feeling invisible, the problem isn't the amount of content or the type of content that you're creating. It's simply the platform on which you are doing it and that you're doing it to a cold audience. Being featured on the right podcast or collaborating with the right partner just one single time does more for your attraction strategy than 30 posts on social media can. And yes, when we were talking about attraction strategies, YouTube and video came up a lot. But the smartest advice that I heard wasn't that you have to do video. Instead, the general consensus was that video is a strategic tool. It is not mandatory. And so YouTube absolutely can be a powerful attraction strategy because there's the evergreen aspect, there's the searchability aspect, the recommendation aspect from their algorithm. Of course, it can also help with the retention piece that we'll talk about in a moment because it gives you access to audience feedback faster. You can get those comments much more easily on a YouTube video than you can through a podcasting platform. However, YouTube and video is still just a strategic tool. It's not a requirement. So, if YouTube fits your content and you have the capacity for it, go for it. But if adding video burns you out or stretches your bandwidth too thin, then it's not worth it. I hear those two objections all the time. And I feel it myself. I am trying to get my YouTube channel up and running, and I am just stretched really thin, and it's taking a lot longer and going a lot more slowly than I anticipated. Podcasting should be sustainable and not stressful. So if adding video makes it stressful, then don't add video. The takeaway from this section talking about attraction is that attraction strategies are not about being loud and being everywhere. It's about being clear and strategic. When people understand what you do and who you do it for, they are going to show up. Attraction works best when clarity comes first. Next up, we're going to talk about retention. And so this is where a lot of podcasts kind of fall off the wagon because attracting listeners doesn't do a whole lot of good if they don't stick around. We want these people listening to entire episodes all the way to the end and then coming back for more. So if we get a lot of listeners, that's great. Our attraction strategies are working. But then we need to keep them coming back. And so we need to work on those retention strategies. One of the strongest messages that came up several times at PodFest was that small audiences are not broken, they're just unfinished. I believe it was Mark Ronick who said those exact words, but the concept was conveyed throughout several different sessions. And so many podcasters think that their show isn't working because their audience isn't multiplying constantly. But growth doesn't always start with scale, with numbers. It often starts with depth. And so if you're only focused on increasing the number of listeners or the number of downloads, you're missing the opportunity to build a relationship with the people who are already there. You've attracted them. They're listening. They're interested. And so your job is to continue that, foster that relationship. If your existing listeners feel seen, supported, and understood, they're going to stick around. And when people stay, everything in the arc gets easier. Another retention theme that came up across multiple sessions was that every episode needs a job. I believe it was Simona Constantini that said this exact phrase here. But again, the concept was present throughout multiple sessions. So the job of your episode might be to educate, to entertain, to nurture, or to move someone closer to working with you. And if your episode isn't strategic, you don't know what it's supposed to do, it's probably not going to do any of those things very well. But when each episode is designed with clarity and purpose, you are strategic about it, then you are naturally building trust and you're keeping people coming back. And one last tip for retention: storytelling is your superpower. It is not surprising that people remember stories way longer than they remember strategies. You've probably heard the phrase, if you're in business, stories sell, facts tell, or something like that. Stories make you human. They bring emotion into your message. They give people a reason to care. And you've also probably heard the saying, it's not what you say, but how you say it. And so storytelling is such a powerful tool. It can be really challenging, at least it is for me. I am a straight to the point kind of gal, but I'm working on it. When listeners feel connected to you, that's when they're going to binge, they're going to subscribe, and they're going to tell their friends. And that is what retention looks like. They're sticking around, they're coming back for more, and it's contributing to your attraction strategy because they are telling other people about it. So if you've been obsessing over numbers and wondering why your audience isn't growing fast enough, I encourage you to try zooming in instead of zooming out. The more intentional that you are with nurturing the people who are already listening, the easier it is for your audience and your podcast as a whole to grow. Next up, we're going to talk about conversion, that third part of the arc. And that's the part that most podcasters avoid or tiptoe around because it feels too salesy. But before we do that, let me just tell you that strategies for attraction, retention, and conversion are covered in depth inside the Podcast Growth Collective. This is my monthly membership for business owners who want more listeners, leads, and sales. And you can check it out at thepodcastteacher.com/collective. Okay, so even though many podcasters want clients and customers from their podcasts, they're not always creating a strategic path in order for that to happen. So remember how I talked about how every episode needs a job just a few minutes ago? This is especially relevant for the conversion part of the arc as well. Some episodes better lend themselves to setting up for sales than others do. So you need to know what your episode's job is. And if it's conversion, make sure that your content is intentional and that your invitations are clear. Be direct. Just like I did a moment ago, give them a direct invitation and say, I'm inviting you to join this. Go check it out. Don't dance around it. And also make sure and mention your call to action more than once. Another one of the strongest conversion insights from PodFest was that a limited series podcast is a hugely underrated tactic. So in case you're unfamiliar, a limited series podcast is a podcast that solves one specific problem for one specific audience. It builds trust quickly and it points directly to the next step, the course, the coaching offer, whatever that is. It's a predefined set number of episodes, usually between 5 and 20. And once those episodes have aired, no new content is published. The idea is that the limited series is essentially an evergreen funnel that constantly attracts new listeners. They binge all of the episodes since there aren't that many of them, and then they are ready to work with you. Conversion works best when the path is obvious and intentional. And so a limited series is a really good way to do that because it's a short and focused series without a lot of room for distractions. With all the things that we've talked about here today, remember that podcast growth doesn't come from doing everything. It comes from strengthening the appropriate part of the arc. I heard a lot of powerful messages at PodFest, and looking at them through the lens of my arc method shows that podcasters need to determine whether the weakest link in their system is attraction, retention, or conversion, and then start there. Focus your energy there first, and then you can work on the other areas. If you'd like support with growing your podcast and examining your podcast's arc, join me in the Podcast Growth Collective for personalized insights and feedback. You can learn more at thepodcastteacher.com/collective. Until next time, happy podcasting.